Oh, showing up in that plain jacket isn't enough to convince me you're the person on this reservation. I've seen people dress simple just to blend in and avoid questions. But I don't fall for that. You're not getting special treatment just because you're keeping quiet. You still don't look like someone cleared for this flight. So no, you're not checking in yet. I gave you my ID, the man answered, his voice low. The name matches the ticket and so does the date of birth. That should be enough. It's not enough for me, the clerk snapped. You hand me a document and expect me to ignore every red flag? The ticket is in business class. The account it's tied to has priority status. And you expect me to believe that's yours? My name is right there, he said again. Adrian Brooks. Same as the ticket. Same as the passport. And I'm telling you something isn't adding up, she replied. You booked a premium seat, you added a minor to the booking, and you're coming through here like this is all routine. People who pay for these seats usually speak up, they don't just stand there staring at me. So either you start explaining or I call security and let them untangle it. A small voice spoke from beside him. Daddy, are we in trouble? He answered without looking away from the clerk. No, sweetheart. We're just waiting for the lady to do her job. The lady is doing her job, the clerk shot back. And part of that job is making sure people aren't using someone else's miles or stolen cards. Especially in times like these, we can't ignore security risks. You think I'm going to let just anyone walk onto this flight with a child? Not a chance. He took a slow breath. What exactly looks like a security risk to you? Your attitude for one, she said. The way you keep questioning me instead of thanking me for keeping this place safe. He was silent for a moment. So the problem is that I'm not grateful enough while you hold the ticket I paid for and tell my daughter she might not be allowed to travel. You're twisting my words, she replied. And the more you talk, the more suspicious this feels. By the time the line behind them began to stall completely, tension had already settled over the counter. Only then did the picture of the scene become clear. Nora Fields, a 40-something rule-bound clerk, leaned over the desk with her finger extended like a warning sign that never switched off. Across from her, Sergeant Adrian Brooks, a late-30s steady father, stood with his shoulders relaxed but his gaze unwavering, one hand resting near the handle of a worn carry-on. At his side, little Maya, an 8-year-old with tired eyes, clutched a small backpack shaped like a blue rocket ship. Nora's badge shone against her blazer as she tapped on the keyboard with clipped precision. Her voice stayed loud enough for the growing line to hear every word. You booked this ticket through a loyalty account that doesn't match your profile picture. The system shows an image from several years ago. That man is in uniform. That man is still me, Adrian replied. People age. Haircuts change. Jobs change. Right, she said. And maybe you just printed this ID in your basement. Adrian's jaw worked once, but he did not answer right away. Inside, a memory flickered, standing in a desert briefing tent while a young soldier shouted at him out of fear, not disrespect. Back then, he had learned that the loudest voices were not always the bravest. He looked at Maya instead. You okay? Maya nodded, though her mouth tightened. I just want to see Aunt Lila. We will, he said as if it were already decided. This is just a delay. 2 lanes over, Blake Turner, a mid-20s anxious traveler, shifted from foot to foot as he watched. He had moved forward with the rest of the line at first, impatient about his own schedule. But the more he listened, the less he could pretend the scene was normal. He felt the urge to speak and felt it stop somewhere in his throat, caught between uncertainty and fear of getting involved. Behind Nora, another clerk whispered, Do you need help? But Nora flicked her hand as if swatting away a fly. I'm fine. I know what I'm doing. Adrian slid his boarding confirmation across the counter, the email printed neatly. This was paid with my card. You can see the last 4 digits. You can see the billing address. You have more than enough to verify me. What I see, Nora answered, is a man trying very hard to sound calm because he knows he's been caught. I've worked here for over 15 years. I've seen people forge everything from student IDs to passports. They grab a kid, pretend to be family, and hope no one looks too closely. Not on my shift. Maya's fingers tightened around his sleeve. Daddy, she thinks you stole me. He touched her hand gently. Look at me, Maya. None of what she thinks changes who we are. That simple sentence hung in the air, sharper than anything he had said so far. Some of the bystanders lowered their eyes. Others raised their phones, the glow of their screens small and guilty between stiff fingers. Somewhere in the line a woman muttered, "This doesn't feel right," but she did not move. What would you do, standing feet away while a father is questioned like a criminal in front of his child? Step closer or stare at the floor and pretend you heard nothing? If your heart leans toward fairness instead of fear, leave your thoughts in the comments and speak up for equal treatment for everyone. Nora pushed the documents back toward him with 2 fingers, as if they were contaminated. I'm giving you one more chance to tell me the truth. Whose account did you use for this booking? A friend's? Someone from work? Because this isn't the kind of profile I see attached to men who look like you. Adrian did not miss the last part. Men who look like me? I meant people who don't regularly fly this route, she said quickly, but her eyes did not match the apology. This account has years of international travel, multiple upgrades, access to VIP lounges. It doesn't match your presentation. My presentation, he repeated slowly. You mean my clothes? Or my face? Or both? I mean everything, she said. You show up in an old jacket and worn shoes, you're carrying a single bag, and you expect me to believe you're some seasoned traveler with priority boarding. No. Something is off. He thought of how easy it would be to answer with the full story. He could tell her how many years he had spent in the air, not as a pampered passenger but in loud steel planes with no windows. He could tell her about the medals locked in a drawer at home, the ones his daughter sometimes asked to wear like shiny toys. He could mention the note in his phone from the airline CEO thanking him for his service and partnership in a veteran support program. Instead, he said only, "You're doing a lot of guessing for someone who supposedly trusts the system." The system isn't perfect, Nora shot back. That's why they hired people like me, to spot what the computer can't. Blake's grip on his phone grew tighter. The injustice felt obvious now, spelled out in every line of dialogue. He saw the way the child tried to stand tall, mimicking her father. He saw how Adrian never raised his voice. And he saw how Nora seemed almost energized by the conflict, like each refusal fed her sense of importance. Blake asked himself a question he did not like. Was he any better than the people pretending not to hear? Maya whispered, "Daddy, maybe we should go home." Adrian knelt slightly so his face was level with hers. We planned this trip. We saved for it. We are not going home because someone has trouble seeing what is in front of her. Nora rolled her eyes. Spare me the speech. You can talk all you like, but until I am satisfied, you're not going anywhere. I can flag this reservation and put a hold on your entire booking. I can have security escort you away from this area if I believe you're being deceptive. Do you really want to test how far I'm willing to go? A murmur rippled through the line. No one stepped out. No one stepped in. It was the kind of moment people remembered later when they told the story and tried to justify why they had done nothing. If you were there, hearing a worker threaten to have a calm father dragged away in front of his child, would your silence feel like safety or like surrender? If you believe silence should never be the easy answer when racism stands in the open, hit subscribe and stay with stories that refuse to excuse it. Adrian straightened again. If you need to call someone, he said, call someone. But stop speaking to my daughter like she is part of your suspicion. I'll speak to whoever I need to speak to, Nora replied. Including her. Children sometimes tell the truth faster than adults. Maybe she'll admit that you're not really her father. That was the phrase that finally snapped something in the crowd. A woman near the back gasped aloud. A man muttered a curse under his breath. Blake felt his chest tighten as if he had been personally accused. He stepped closer without fully deciding to, raising his phone just enough that the red recording dot glowed. Nora noticed. You can't film at this counter without permission. I'm just documenting the process, Blake said, his voice more steady than he felt. For transparency. Adrian glanced at him briefly, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. The small act did not change Nora's behavior, but it broke the illusion that she was unquestioned. We're done here until a supervisor arrives, Adrian said quietly. You have my documents. I've answered your questions. Now either verify them or escalate it. But do not insult my family again. Nora smirked. I don't need a supervisor. I need security. She reached for the phone next to her keyboard, dialing an internal extension with a practiced motion. This is Nora at check-in desk 4, she said. I have a passenger refusing to comply with identity verification. Possible fraudulent booking. Possible security risk. He's becoming argumentative and is attempting to create a scene. Adrian closed his eyes for a brief second, steadying his breathing while Maya clung to his sleeve. The words possible security risk were not new to him. He had heard them in war rooms on radio calls, attached to distant names. Hearing them now attached to his own name over a family trip felt like a strange insult he refused to let reshape him. He opened his eyes again. You don't know anything about what a security risk looks like, he said quietly. Nora laughed once. Trust me, I know enough. People like you show up all the time. You think the rules don't apply, and then you act offended when someone holds the line. The moment was ready to tip. Everyone could feel it, even if they would describe it differently later. Some would say they felt discomfort. Others would admit they felt fear. A few would confess they felt ugly satisfaction watching someone else being grilled. The air around the counter thickened with judgment and indecision, stretched tight as the seconds moved. And then, somewhere behind them, the slow, firm rhythm of approaching footsteps signaled that the next phase of this confrontation was about to begin. What happens when quiet dignity finally collides with the authority that underestimated it? Keep listening, and remember to share this story if you believe that checking in for a flight should never turn into a public trial based on skin color and assumptions. The footsteps came closer, unhurried but unmistakably purposeful. Nora straightened, expecting a security officer in a black uniform or perhaps a manager with a clipboard and a weary expression. She rehearsed her explanation in her head, already certain she would be praised for vigilance. Instead, a woman in a dark, sharply pressed dress uniform stepped into view beside Adrian. Captain Monique Harris, a mid-30s composed officer, stood with hands clasped behind her back, medals glinting on her chest. She surveyed the counter without rushing, her gaze moving from Nora to Adrian to the trembling child at his side. I'm responding to a call about a security concern, Monique said. What seems to be the problem? Nora gestured toward Adrian as if presenting evidence. This passenger's identification doesn't match the profile on the booking. The ticket shows elite status and a long history of travel. He appears with a minor whose connection to him is unverified. He's being uncooperative and argumentative. I'm concerned the reservation may be fraudulent. Monique tilted her head slightly. You verified the documents? I've looked at them, Nora said. There are inconsistencies in how he presents himself versus what the account suggests. I believe more investigation is needed before he's allowed to board, or even remain in this area. Adrian held her gaze. You left out the part where you accused me of using someone else's miles, implied I might have forged my ID, and suggested my daughter might admit I'm not really her father. Monique's eyes shifted to Nora with new weight. Is that accurate? Nora bristled. I asked necessary questions. People lie, especially when children are involved. I'm not going to apologize for keeping this airport safe. Monique's expression did not change, but something sharpened around her eyes. Blake, still recording from a few steps back, felt a subtle shift. It was like watching someone silently put puzzle pieces together faster than anyone else realized there was a picture. May I see the documents? Monique asked. Adrian handed them to her without comment. She examined the passport, the ID, the printed confirmation. She flipped through the pages with practiced ease, noted the series of stamps, scanned the barcodes. Maya Brooks, she read softly from the ticket. Connecting to Denver. Visiting family? Yes, ma'am, Adrian replied. Maya peered up at Monique. We're going to see my Aunt Lila, she said. Daddy promised to show me the mountains. Monique smiled at her gently. That sounds like a good promise. Then she looked back at the clerk. You said the profile picture does not match? Nora turned her monitor slightly, showing the old image associated with the loyalty account. It showed a younger man in full combat uniform, Slightly thinner, hair cropped closer, expression serious. Monique studied it for a moment, then lifted her gaze to Adrian's face. The rank on that photo is Staff Sergeant, she said. The name is the same. Time in life can change a person's appearance. The eyes rarely do. So you're just taking his word for it? Nora demanded. Monique straightened. No. I am taking experience into account while I verify what should have been verified calmly in the first place. She tapped a few keys on the keyboard, requesting additional data from the system. Lines of text appeared: account creation date, travel history, notes attached by customer service agents over the years. One line highlighted caught her attention. Here, she said. Note from corporate. Account holder recognized for military service partnership. Participant in veteran outreach program. Handle with courtesy. Nora frowned. That doesn't mean he's the rightful owner. People can get into accounts. Monique looked at her fully now. You're right. People can access accounts that are not theirs. That's why you ask clear, professional questions instead of making personal judgments based on how they look or dress. Adrian stood quiet, letting the officer guide the exchange. He could have stepped in at any point, but something in Monique's posture told him she knew more than she was showing. In moments like this, what do you think matters more? The uniform on someone's chest or the way they choose to use their authority? If you think real security begins with respect rather than suspicion, write your thoughts in the comments and stand with those who demand better. Blake felt courage creep a little higher in his chest. He cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said to Monique, I've been recording this interaction. If you need a record of what was said before you arrived, you can have it. Nora turned on him again. You people always want to make everything go viral. You don't understand what it's like to be responsible for other people's safety. Blake met her glare. I understand what it's like to watch someone abused under the excuse of safety. That's why I hit record. Monique nodded to him. Thank you. We may need that file later. She returned her attention to Adrian. For the record, sir, are you traveling under any official orders today? No, ma'am, he said. Just taking my daughter to see family. It was supposed to be simple. There is a note here about a ceremony in Denver next week, Monique added, reading from the screen. Honoring distinguished service members. Are you attending? Adrian hesitated. Yes. Nora folded her arms. That proves nothing. Everyone wants to play the hero when they get caught. Monique's voice cooled further. Miss Fields, I'd like you to stop commenting while I complete verification. Nora flushed. I'm just saying. That's the issue, Monique cut in. You've been just saying a great deal. Now you will listen. The line behind them had grown long, coiling back toward the entrance ropes. Yet no one complained about the delay anymore. All eyes were fixed on the counter, on the clash between rigid suspicion and measured authority. It felt less like a customer service issue now and more like a judgment being weighed. Monique pulled a small device from her pocket, one used for higher-level ID checks. She placed Adrian's passport on it, then his driver's license. The machine hummed quietly, processing encrypted data. Confirm your full name and date of birth aloud, please, she said. Adrian Marcus Brooks, May 17, 1986, he replied. The device beeped. Monique scanned the results, then looked up slowly. Verification matches, she said. Documents valid. No flags. She turned the screen so Nora could see. There is no fraud here. No security risk. Only a father trying to travel with his child. Nora's mouth tightened. Machines aren't perfect. He could still be. What exactly? Monique demanded. What could he still be in your mind that this record, these documents, and this child's trust do not already disprove? Nora opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at Adrian as if seeing him for the first time, not as an inconvenience but as a person she could no longer control. Adrian broke the silence. Are we cleared to check in now? Yes, sir, Monique said. You were cleared from the moment you walked up with valid documents. This delay should never have happened. She leaned slightly toward Maya. Young lady, I'm sorry this took so long. You and your father have every right to continue your trip. Maya gave a small, uncertain smile. It's okay, she said. We just want to go see Aunt Lila. Monique looked back at Nora. You will process their check-in immediately. And you will do it respectfully. Reluctantly, Nora tapped the required fields on her screen. Boarding passes printed with quiet efficiency. She slid them toward Adrian without looking up. You're checked in, she muttered. He did not take them right away. My daughter deserves to hear you say you were wrong, he said, not harshly, but with a calm that left no room for argument. Excuse me? Nora asked. You told her I might not be her father, he continued. You implied I was using her as a cover. You called us a security risk loud enough for half this hall to hear. The least you can do is tell her you were wrong. Nora's gaze flicked toward the small girl, then back to Adrian. Pride warred with something else in her face. Maybe fear, maybe shame, maybe both. I was following procedure, she tried. Monique's voice was quiet but firm. No procedure requires humiliation. You went beyond your role. Own it. For a long moment, Nora said nothing. Then her shoulders sagged fractionally. She turned to Maya. I may have misjudged the situation, she said. I'm sorry if what I said scared you. Maya's hand squeezed her father's. I forgive you, she answered, because that was how Adrian had raised her. Forgiveness did not erase wrongs, but it released her from carrying their weight. Adrian finally took the boarding passes. Thank you, he said to Monique. I appreciate your help. You won't always have someone in uniform standing nearby, Monique replied softly. Next time you're stopped like this, and we both know there could be a next time, I hope someone else finds their courage sooner. If you've ever watched someone be treated as a problem instead of a person and felt your tongue lock behind your teeth, ask yourself what held you back. Fear or habit? If you think courage doesn't belong only to uniforms but to anyone willing to say, this isn't right, subscribe and keep walking with stories that challenge silence. Adrian gestured for Maya to pick up her backpack. As they began to step away, Monique's posture shifted. Something in her face hinted that the scene was not quite over. Sergeant Brooks, she said quietly. He paused. The title hung in the air like a word from another life. Would you mind staying for just another moment? She asked. Nora blinked. Sergeant. Monique smiled faintly. Yes. That part was missing from your computer screen. The next words would change everything about how everyone in that hall understood the man they had just watched treated like a suspect. Adrian turned back slowly. For years he had moved through airports with as little attention as possible. He had never once introduced himself by rank at a civilian counter. He had learned that the fewer details strangers had, the easier it was to move quietly through their expectations. Hearing the title spoken so openly made him feel exposed and oddly tired. Monique stepped around the counter, coming to stand directly in front of him. She squared her shoulders, heels aligned, hands at her sides. Then, without hesitation, she raised her hand to her brow in a crisp salute. Sergeant Adrian Brooks, she said, her voice carrying further than she intended. On behalf of those of us still serving, it's an honor to meet you. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Several phones, including Blake's, lowered for a moment as people tried to process what they were seeing. Maya stared up at her father with wide eyes. Daddy, why is she doing that? Adrian looked down at her. Because we worked together once, he said, choosing simple truth over long explanation. Nora was frozen. Her earlier confidence drained from her face, replaced by pure disbelief. What is going on? She asked. Why are you saluting a passenger? Monique lowered her hand, but her respect did not fade. Because this passenger is a decorated war veteran whose file I've read more than once in training briefs. He led missions that saved lives many of us never met but owe everything to. His record is used as a case study in leadership under pressure. Nora shook her head slowly. That can't be right. He said nothing. He never mentioned. Why would he? Monique asked. He didn't need your approval. He only needed you to respect the documents he gave you and the humanity standing in front of you. Blake felt his chest swell with conflicting emotions. Shame for having hesitated, admiration for the calm dignity in front of him, anger at the casual cruelty he had initially tried to ignore. The reveal made everything that came before look even uglier, though it had been ugly enough already. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. "Captain, that's not necessary." "With respect, Sergeant," Monique replied, "it is. You may not like attention, but you deserve the record to be set straight in front of the people who heard you called a risk. In a moment like this, when truth finally steps into the light, what would you want the crowd to do? Clap, apologize, or rethink everything they believed about who looks dangerous and who looks safe? Share how you think people should respond when they realize they misjudged someone so badly, and remember to stand firm for those who rarely get this kind of public correction." The supervisor arrived then, drawn by the commotion. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a badge that read, Operations Manager. He glanced from Monique to Adrian to Nora, trying to understand. "What's happening here?" he asked. Monique spoke first. "We had a situation where a clerk went beyond procedure and harassed a verified passenger and his daughter. The passenger happens to be Sergeant Adrian Brooks, a decorated veteran and partner in your airline's own veteran program." The manager's body stiffened. "Brooks? As in the same Brooks who spoke at our training summit last year?" Adrian sighed. "I attended, yes." The manager's face paled. "Sir, I didn't recognize you without the formal setting. I'm so sorry this happened." Nora stared between them. "You know him?" "Everyone in leadership should," the manager replied. "This man helped design the trauma support protocols we use for military families. He's on our advisory board. His story is in our onboarding videos." A new wave of murmurs rolled through the line. People glanced at Adrian with fresh eyes. Some looked admiring. Others looked ashamed. A few seemed almost excited by the sudden proximity to someone important. Adrian's expression didn't change much. "I didn't come here for recognition," he said. "I came here to take my daughter to see her aunt. That should not require a resume." Blake stepped forward, emboldened. "Sir, I recorded the entire interaction before the captain arrived," he said to the manager. "If you need proof of what was said, I can send it to you." "Please do," the manager replied quickly. "We'll need a full report." Nora's voice finally reappeared, small and shaky. I didn't know," she said. "If I had known who he was." Adrian turned to her, and for the first time his voice carried a sharp edge. "That's exactly the problem," he said. "You think respect depends on knowing who someone is outside this line. You think it depends on status, on rank, on titles. You shouldn't need any of that. You should have treated us decently from the start because we're people, not because of what's in a file." His words landed heavier than any raised voice could have. Nora flinched slightly. Monique folded her arms. "His identity as a veteran makes your behavior more embarrassing for this company," she said. "But it isn't what made it wrong. It was wrong when you assumed a black father with a scared child must be a security risk. It was wrong when you tried to intimidate him into giving up his seat. It was wrong when you spoke to the child as if she were a piece of evidence." The manager nodded grimly. "Miss Fields, step away from the counter," he said. She stared at him. "You can't be serious. I was doing my job. If we start punishing people for being careful, no one will want to work here." "Careful is double-checking documents," he replied. "What you did was profile, escalate, and humiliate. That is not the job we hired you to do." "I've given this company 15 years, she protested. "And this man gave the country much more than that," he said quietly. "Yet he stood here and kept his calm while you tore into him." "Step away from the counter." Nora's hands trembled as she unpinned her badge. She placed it on the surface where so many of her judgments had played out and stepped to the side. Two security staff members approached, not to confront Adrian, but to escort her toward the back offices. "Is this necessary?" she asked, her voice cracking. "An internal review is necessary," the manager replied. "You'll have a chance to explain yourself there. For now, you're relieved of duty." As she walked away, some of the passengers looked at her with open disapproval. Others stared at the floor, uncomfortable with how quickly power had shifted. It was easier to watch someone bully than to watch them be stripped of authority. Maya tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "are they taking her to timeout?" He almost smiled. "Something like that," he said. The manager turned back to Adrian. Sergeant Brooks, I'm deeply sorry. This should never have happened. We'll be reviewing all our procedures and retraining staff. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you later to hear your perspective as both a passenger and a veteran. Adrian nodded slowly. We can talk. But right now, I'd still like to make our flight. Of course, the manager said quickly. You and your daughter will be escorted through expedited screening and invited to the lounge while you wait. And your tickets will be upgraded to first class if that's acceptable. Adrian hesitated. I don't need an upgrade. It isn't payment, the manager said. It's an apology in the only language this system immediately understands, improving your experience instead of sabotaging it. Adrian glanced at Maya, who looked up at him with hopeful eyes. Do they have juice in the lounge? She asked. He exhaled. All right, he said. If you were in his shoes, would you accept that upgrade knowing it came only after being treated like a threat? Or would you refuse on principle, even if your child had been scared for nothing? Think about the trade-offs we ask the targets of racism to make, and if you believe they shouldn't have to bargain for basic respect, hit subscribe and keep following stories that refuse to normalize that bargain. Before they left the counter, Adrian turned back to Blake. Thank you, he said. For recording. For stepping in. You didn't have to. Blake shook his head. I did, he replied. If I walked away, I'd have to carry that. The manager noticed the exchange. Mr. Blake Turner, he said. Mr. Turner, I'd like your contact information, the manager added. Passengers who step up for others are the kind of people we want on our customer advisory council. If you're interested, there may be a role for you there. Blake blinked. Sure. Yes. I'd be honored. He had shown the bare minimum of courage, yet it was more than most had. Sometimes the smallest step was still a step toward a different kind of world. Adrian and Maya followed Monique toward a side entrance, leaving behind the counter where everything had unfolded. But the impact of their exit remained, echoing in the eyes of those who had watched. The setting would soon shift, but the question stayed the same. What do people do after witnessing injustice laid bare? Forget, excuse, or change. The corridor to the lounge was quieter than the check-in area, but Adrian's mind remained crowded. He had spent years teaching younger soldiers to decompress after missions, to file away what happened without letting it command their every thought. Today he found himself needing his own advice. Monique walked beside him, her steps measured. I'm sorry your daughter had to see all of that, she said. I remember being her age and watching my father get pulled out of airport lines for random checks that always seemed to find him. Adrian nodded. I was hoping she'd get a different world than the one we grew up in. Maybe she will, Monique replied. But days like this remind us we aren't there yet. The lounge doors opened with a soft click. Inside, the space felt like a different universe from the tension outside. Quiet seating, soft announcements, staff moving with careful politeness. Adrian almost laughed at the contrast. The same airline that had allowed his humiliation was now handing him free snacks and comfortable chairs as if that could balance the scale. The lounge hostess approached with a practiced smile that faded into genuine recognition when she saw Monique's uniform and Adrian's expression. We were told to expect you, she said. Please make yourselves comfortable. Anything you need is on the house. Maya tugged his hand. Can I get orange juice? She asked. You can get two, he said, grateful for something simple to say. They settled at a table near the window. Planes moved slowly across the tarmac outside, noses turning toward the runway like patient animals waiting their turn to run. Adrian watched them, his thoughts drifting to missions flown at night, cargo bays packed with supplies, the heavy silence before a drop. Monique sat across from him. You know, she said, when I first saw your name on the call log, I thought someone was joking. We studied your unit's deployment during my officer training. You were the one who argued for including local translators as essential personnel on evacuation flights. Those translators saved more lives than we did, he said. I just didn't want them left behind. That's leadership, she replied. Seeing the people others try to ignore. He glanced at her. You did the same thing today. She shrugged. It shouldn't require a uniform to see that a man with a kid and a valid ticket deserves basic respect. In the distance, an announcement reminded passengers of boarding times. It felt like a different story entirely, one where travelers simply worried about delays and seat assignments instead of whether they would be allowed to fly at all. If you've ever wondered why so many veterans stay quiet about who they are, days like this are part of the answer. Would you constantly announce your achievements just to avoid being treated badly, or would you rather hide them and endure the assumptions? Share what you think about the burden of always having to prove your worth, and if you believe no one should need medals to be treated decently, add your voice to those refusing that standard. Maya returned from the drink station with her glass and a small cookie. She climbed into the seat next to him. "Daddy," she said, "why didn't you tell the lady you were important?" He thought carefully. "Because, sweetie, being important isn't what should make people kind. If strangers only treat you well because they think you're special, they'll treat someone else badly because they don't look special enough." "But you are special," she insisted. He smiled softly. "So are you. So is every person who was in that line. They just don't all have uniforms or medals to show it." She frowned. "So, does that mean the lady won't be mean to other people anymore?" "I hope it means she'll think twice before she is," he said. "Sometimes people only learn when they face consequences." Monique shifted forward slightly. "There will be consequences," she said. "I'm filing an incident report too. Not just because of who you are, but because of how dangerous it is when someone with authority uses it based on bias." Adrian nodded. "I appreciate that. But I also hope the training they get afterward isn't just about not embarrassing the company. It should be about seeing people." "That's something I can bring up in the report," Monique said. "Would you consider speaking at another training session? Not as a war hero story, but about this. About what it feels like to be targeted in civilian life after risking your life abroad." He hesitated. "I don't like turning my life into a lesson for people who might only listen for a day." "Maybe," she said. "But some lessons need a face. And you already gave them one today whether you wanted to or not." Maya rested her head against his arm. Her eyes were open but heavy. "I don't like airports," she murmured. He kissed her forehead. "Airports are just places," he said softly. "They're like mirrors. They show us who we are. Today, some people didn't like what they saw. And some did," Monique added. "That man who stood up to record? Blake? He did more than many." Adrian remembered the way Blake's voice had trembled at first, then steadied. "Yeah," he said. "It takes courage to aim a camera at power." Outside, a plane took off, lifting into the gray sky until it was a small dot. Maya followed it with her eyes. "Do you think Aunt Lila is waiting at the airport already?" she asked. "Knowing your aunt, she's probably pacing," Adrian said. "Why?" Maya asked. "Because she cares too much," he replied. Monique watched the father and daughter, feeling a familiar ache. She had chosen service over family for years. Seeing him balance both so carefully reminded her of the cost and the beauty of that choice. Time moved, slowly smoothing the edges of the confrontation behind them. Yet Adrian knew the story would live on, in training slides and whispered conversations among staff, in the way some passengers would now notice every interaction at a counter a little more sharply. When their flight was finally called, a lounge attendant walked over. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "your flight is boarding. We've arranged pre-boarding for you and your daughter. Captain Harris will escort you to the gate." Monique rose with them. "One more walk through the circus," she said lightly. The gate area had changed. The line was shorter now, many of the earlier witnesses already dispersed into the maze of terminals. But some remained, and they straightened noticeably when they saw Adrian returning with Monique at his side. Blake was still there, sitting near the gate with his backpack at his feet. He stood when he saw them. "Sir," he said, "I wasn't sure if you'd make it on this flight." "We're not easy to get rid of," Adrian replied. Blake smiled awkwardly. "I sent the video to the manager and to myself. Just in case." "Good," Adrian said. "Never trust a system that only keeps copies you don't control." Monique nodded approvingly. "You did the right thing," she told Blake. "A lot of people film and then walk away chasing likes. You recorded and stayed. Blake rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, I'm still a little shaken. That's not a bad sign, Adrian said. It means your conscience works. If you've ever been the person who filmed but did nothing more, or the person who wished they had filmed at all, let this moment be a quiet challenge. Next time you see something wrong, what will you hold up first? Your phone, your voice, or both? Leave a comment with the promise you're making to yourself, and keep listening if you want stories that turn bystanders into allies instead of background decoration. Boarding began. As they walked down the jet bridge, Maya squeezed Adrian's hand with renewed excitement. Does first class mean bigger seats? She asked. It means we get a little more space to stretch, he said. But it doesn't make us more important than anyone else on this plane. She pondered that. Then why do they call it first? Because sometimes adults give things names to feel better about how they divide people, he answered. But the sky doesn't care what section we sit in. It holds us all the same. Monique heard the words and tucked them away. She knew he would probably never write a speech about days like this. Yet he was full of lines that could anchor 100 speeches. At the aircraft door, the lead flight attendant greeted them warmly. Sergeant Brooks, she said, we've been briefed. We're glad to have you and your daughter on board. Adrian almost corrected her. He wanted to say just Adrian is fine, but he stopped. Maybe there was value in having the title said aloud this once, if only to remind the crew that the man who had been questioned so harshly at the counter was now entrusted with their care in a different way. They took their seats. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Adrian looked out the window, breathing steadily while the ground shrank. The worst part of the day was behind them, but he knew the story wouldn't stay in this terminal. It would travel, with Blake's recording, with Monique's report, with the whispers of passengers who had finally seen bias exposed in an undeniable way. Denver greeted them with cooler air and a sky bright enough to sting tired eyes. Adrian carried Maya on his hip as they descended the escalator toward baggage claim. Aunt Lila stood near the bottom, waving both arms at once, her smile wide enough to erase at least part of the day's memory. Maya wriggled free and ran to her, launching herself into Lila's embrace. Adrian followed at a slower pace, the weight of the day still sitting somewhere behind his ribs. Lila hugged him hard. You look exhausted, she said. What happened? Flight delay? Something like that, he said. I'll tell you later. She studied his face and didn't press. She knew her brother. When he said later, it meant the story was heavy and needed room. They spent the drive catching up on ordinary things. School projects, neighborhood news, the renovations Lila had finally finished in her tiny kitchen. Adrian welcomed the normalcy like a drink of water after a long march. But the world had other plans for how quiet this story would remain. By the time they reached Lila's apartment, Adrian's phone was buzzing repeatedly. Messages poured in, from the airline manager, from a fellow veteran who worked in HR, from an old platoon mate who rarely called unannounced. You might want to look at this, Lila said, holding up her own phone. Is that you? On her screen, a short clip was already circulating on social media. It showed Nora pointing aggressively, her words sharp. It showed Adrian standing still, Maya's hand gripping his sleeve. It ended just as Monique stepped into frame, her uniform visible but her face not yet in focus. The caption read, Black father harassed at check-in, then officer walks up and everything changes. Adrian exhaled slowly. I was afraid of that, he said. Maya peeked at the video and frowned. I don't like that lady, she said. Why would people want to watch her being mean? Because some people need to see what mean looks like when it's dressed as doing your job, Lila replied. The airline manager's message was short and urgent. Video is spreading fast. We're moving on internal review. We'd like your statement before the story gets twisted. Can we schedule a call? Adrian considered ignoring it, but he knew how narratives worked. If he stayed silent, the airline might issue a statement praising their swift response, without addressing the deeper issue. He'd seen that pattern too many times. He wrote back, tomorrow morning. After I settle my daughter. That night, after Maya fell asleep clutching her stuffed rocket, Adrian sat at the small kitchen table with Lila and told her everything. He repeated Nora's words, the exact phrasing of people like you, the way she had said security risk, as if it were a label that deserved to stick. He described Monique's arrival, the salute, the humiliation shifting forms from one person to another. Lila listened with her hands clasped together so she wouldn't slam them on the table. "I'm glad that woman was walked away from the counter," she said. "But I'm tired of stories that only feel wrong to people once they find out the target is important." "Same," he said. "If I'd been a warehouse worker with no record in the same outfit, would they be this upset? Or would they say I was difficult, and move on?" "That's the part you can't let them dodge in your statement," she replied. "They'll want to focus on your service, your medals. Make sure you talk about the people without medals. If you've ever had your pain taken seriously only after someone discovered your job title, income, or education, you know the insult beneath the apology. Would you accept that attention just to get justice, or would you push the conversation wider like Adrian is about to do? Leave your thoughts if this tension feels familiar, and if you believe real equality isn't about exceptions for this special few, stay close to stories that refuse to settle for that. The next morning, Adrian joined a video call with the airline's senior leadership. Faces appeared in small squares, some earnest, some nervous, some carefully neutral. The manager who had removed Nora sat near the top row. "Sergeant Brooks," the CEO began, "thank you for speaking with us. First, we want to apologize again for what you and your daughter went through." "Thank you," Adrian said. "But I want to be clear. My daughter and I are not the only ones you should be thinking about. We just happen to be the ones on camera today." They listened. He described the incident in detail, but he did more than that. He talked about the times he'd been followed in stores, the extra pat-downs at security, the random checks that weren't random at all. He spoke without drama, in the same calm tone he'd used at the counter, which made his words land harder. "I'm used to this," he said. "That's the worst part. There's a rhythm to it now: question, suspicion, escalation. Usually I swallow it because if I react, someone will say I was aggressive. Yesterday I had my daughter with me. I wanted her to see a different response. Calm, steady. I'm proud of that. But I'm not proud that she had to see any of it." The CEO leaned forward. "We are taking immediate action with the employee involved," she said. "Suspension pending investigation, mandatory retraining, and—" Adrian held up a hand. "That's one person," he said. "She needs to be held accountable, yes. But if you stop there, you miss the point." She felt confident doing what she did because the culture around her told her she'd get away with it. Maybe she thought she'd be praised for being thorough. You need to ask why she was so sure. Silence settled over the call. Some executives shifted, uncomfortable. The manager looked relieved that someone else was saying what he'd tried to express in his own report. "We'd like your help reviewing our training materials," one vice president said at last. "You are already on our veteran advisory board, but perhaps we could expand your role as a consultant on equity and customer treatment." "I'll help," Adrian replied. "On one condition." "Name it," the CEO said. "You don't just use my face in a video and call it progress," he said. "You actually change how you measure success. You reward staff who de-escalate instead of staff who catch fraud, based on gut feelings that always seem to point at the same skin color." The CEO nodded slowly. "That's fair," she said. "We can build new metrics, new incentives. And we can invite staff to share their own experiences with bias, both receiving and witnessing. And don't punish people who speak up," Adrian added. "That passenger who recorded? If your policies discourage that, you'll never know what's really happening at your counters." "We'd like to invite him to join the advisory council as well," the manager said. "I already reached out." Adrian smiled slightly. "Good." When the call ended, he felt both drained and strangely lighter. He had spent years planning missions where success meant everyone coming home alive. This mission was different, slower, more complicated, but no less important. Later that afternoon, Monique called. "The review panel asked for my input," she said. "I told them exactly what I saw. I also told them I'd resign from their security liaison role if they treated this as a PR problem instead of a structural one." "You do that?" he asked. "Some uniforms are easy to replace," she replied. "Some reputations aren't. I'd rather keep mine intact. Weeks passed. The video continued to circulate, but its edges softened as new stories crowded into the feed. Yet inside the airline, the impact did not fade as quickly. Training modules were rewritten. New scenarios were added, featuring not just blatant outbursts but quieter forms of bias, double standards, tone policing, gut feelings that always pointed in one direction. Adrian flew again more than once. Each time he approached a counter, he saw staff straighten a little, some out of respect, some out of fear of becoming the next viral clip. He tried to greet them kindly, but he did not dilute the truth. Blake attended his first advisory council meeting. He entered timidly, surrounded by people who seemed more important on paper. But when it came time to discuss passenger perspectives, his simple sentence carried weight. I realized the worst part wasn't what happened at the counter. It was how long I stood there before pressing record. His honesty earned nods around the table. It also earned him a quiet thank you from Adrian afterward. Nora's fate moved on a parallel path. The internal investigation confirmed what everyone had already seen on video. She had gone beyond procedure, made assumptions, and escalated without cause. The company offered her remedial training and a chance to return in a different role. She attended the training, listened to stories that made her squirm, and spoke with a counselor about why control meant so much to her. One afternoon, months later, Adrian walked through a different airport on his way to another speaking engagement. He spotted her near a staff entrance, no longer in a frontline role but in a quiet support position, sorting documents. Their eyes met briefly. She looked away first, then forced herself to look back. He gave a small nod. Not forgiveness, it had already been given. Not approval, she still had work to do. Just acknowledgement that she was on a path that could be better than the one she'd been walking. That evening, he took the stage at a community event focused on justice and equity. The organizers had asked him to share the story everyone saw online, but he knew the clip alone could not hold everything that mattered. So he started somewhere else. He talked about the first time he boarded a military flight, the roar of engines, the weight of gear, the way fear and purpose tangled together. He described returning home to an America that thanked him with free coffee at some shops while following him in others. He spoke about Maya, about wanting her to know both the pride and the pressure of their history without carrying unnecessary shame. Then he told the story of the check-in counter. He did not dramatize. He did not exaggerate. He simply delivered the facts, lined with the feelings he had kept mostly inside at the time. The insult of being doubted in front of his child, the anger he had swallowed so the clerk's narrative wouldn't win, the grief of knowing countless others faced similar treatment without officers stepping in or managers apologizing. When you saw that video, he said to the crowd, some of you were angry because a veteran was treated that way. I understand that reaction. I appreciate the respect. But I need you to understand something deeper. What happened was wrong before anyone knew about my service. It was wrong from the first moment a woman looked at me and decided I didn't look like someone who could own that ticket. He scanned the room, locking eyes not to intimidate but to connect. If there's anything you carry from this story, let it be this. Dignity is not a reward you give people once they earn it. It's the baseline. That's where you start. You don't ask someone to prove they deserve respect. You assume they do unless they show you otherwise. He paused, letting the words rest. And when you're the one watching this happen, at an airport, in a store, in a classroom, you have a choice. You can be the person who looks away, telling yourself it's not your business. Or you can be the person who steps closer like Blake did. Maybe you record. Maybe you speak. Maybe you simply stand where the person being targeted can see you and know they're not alone. Every one of those choices matters. If you've stayed with this story to this point, you already know something in it touched you. Maybe you've been Adrian. Maybe you've been Blake. Maybe if you're honest, you've been Nora. Whichever you recognize, let it move you towards something better. Comment with the role you refuse to play next time, silent bystander, easy judge, or someone who steps up. And if you believe racism should never be excused as just doing my job, hit subscribe and walk with voices that keep that promise alive. Adrian finished with a quiet truth. My uniform, my medals, my rank, they gave me leverage in that moment. They made people listen who should have listened already. But the real power that day wasn't on my chest. It was in my decision not to let someone else's prejudice tell my daughter who her father is. It was in the calm I held when everything in me wanted to shout. That's a power every one of you has, the power to know who you are even when the world gets it wrong. The audience rose not because a hero stood before them, but because a human being had handed them a mirror and asked them to look. And that was the quiet victory hidden inside the loud chaos at the check-in counter. Not that a veteran had been vindicated, but that a lesson about dignity, equality, and respect had taken on flesh and voice, refusing to be reduced to a viral clip. Airports would still make mistakes. People would still judge by skin and clothes and assumptions. But somewhere in those lines, more eyes would be open, more phones ready not just to capture, but to confront, and more hearts anchored in the simple belief Adrian carried like a medal only he could see. Respect is not a favor. It is the starting point,